it in this room and have it there. I'm just trying to make
whatever
it so
you think is
it's not
best.
so loud.
Whatever you think is best.
Okay, I'm going to move it because
Yeah.
it's so loud.
All right, we're getting started again. Sorry, live streamers. There were a number of folks watching, and I aborted the whole thing because somebody tried to call. They were trying to get me to see a comment on the stream, which is a very important thing to point out. But I'm using my phone for the live stream. But this is totally good. I will reach out after the live stream.
That's good right there, Cheryl.
I know, right?
That's fine.
All right, and then my wife disappeared. I think she's helping my son with something. So here's what we're gonna do. I just got. Oh, and the last one I was gonna mention is Adam and Eileen. Eileen apparently had another seizure, so they're not here this evening. So let's just be in prayer for our church family, right? We want to get to, several Wednesdays in a row we had really robust attendance, and I want to get back to that. That's not beyond the realm of possibility. Let's just jump right back into it, and that's gonna come from what's that?
Ray's still in Kennebunk.
I figured he was. Figured he's working late. He's been working late a lot more.
Yeah, because the job is down there.
Yeah, it's just a long drive. This is exactly right. Yep. We will get everybody back to full strength. And summer's notoriously difficult. Everybody's got stuff, and even working outdoors, that's going to be like Brackley Electric picks up too. It's so. All right. I think we're getting back into it. Everybody's together. My hearing aids are freaking out because the stream is trying to connect to it. But just, we're going to push through. This is crazy, man. What a crazy night. All right. Last week, we finished chapter 1 as James helped us clearly understand that talking a religious talk is very different than walking a religious walk. True, active, alive, real religion is found in our works. And that doesn't mean we're saved by our works. That's not a works-based salvation. But if faith equals works, if faith is manifest in works, then it is in that sense that we can join Paul, like he said in Romans chapter 2, and talk about striving for immortality and talk about persevering in the faith. We can join James, who says, you know why I don't like the 5 solas? Faith alone, scripture alone. The only time faith alone is used in the Bible is in one time in this book, and it's used in a negative sense. I think that the words faith alone can really accidentally lean into antinomianism, which basically says, all right, I got saved, I'm locked in, I got my fire escape, I'm going to heaven when I die, that's the whole point of this, I'm all set. And that's not how salvation plays out in the life of the believer. So there's that. In fact, since we got the TV here, I think at the very end I'll show you a very brief video by Tim Mackey and the Bible Project, which is a very brief overview of the book of James. And in it, he sums up some of these concepts extremely well. So we'll close with that. All right. So James is now going to spend the next chapter expounding on what he just covered in the first chapter, which is faith is only as real as the actions in which it is manifest. Okay? So we're going to cover this chapter in 2 weeks. So there are 4 paragraphs, 3 normal-sized paragraphs, and 1 VSP, very short paragraph at the very bottom. So let's take turns reading. If you would be so kind to read the first 3 paragraphs, and I'll finish with that last paragraph. Who would like to read the first one? Just jump right in.
My brethren, have not the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, with respective persons. For if there come unto you an assembly a man with a gold ring and goodly apparel, and there come also a poor man in vile raiment, and ye have respect to him that weareth the gay clothing, and say unto him, sit thou here in a good place, and say to the poor, stand thou here, or sit here under my footstool, are ye not then partial in yourselves, and become judges of evil thoughts?
Hearken, my beloved brethren, hath not God chosen the poor of this world rich in faith, and heirs of the kingdom which he hath promised to them that love him? But ye have despised the poor. Do not rich men oppress you, and draw you before the judgment seats? Do not they blaspheme that worthy name by which ye are called?
If ye fulfill the royal law according to the scripture, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, and do well. But if ye have respect of persons, ye commit sin, and are convinced of the law as transgressors. For whosoever shall keep the whole law, and yet offend in one point, he is guilty of all. For he that said, do not commit adultery, said also, do not kill. Now if thou commit no adultery, yet if thou kill, thou art become a transgressor of the law.
So, speak ye, and so do, as they that shall be judged by the law of liberty. For he shall have judgment without mercy that showed no mercy, and mercy rejoiceth against judgment. The word assembly that's used here, does it come on by itself? Oh, I know what's going on. Amber turned it on upstairs. Actually, I'm not going to use the remote, or I'm going to turn it off down, and then we'll have a war going on.
Yeah, let's watch Scarface. No,
All right. Oh, great. It's probably going to be some garbage program. I'm going to just shield the remote and not turn it off. Like so. There we go.
Okay.
This is funny. What else? What's next?
I think technology is not on our side this evening. All right. My goodness. What a night. And then Kevin has a fever, so I can't parlay off of him and be like, yeah, take over, I'm falling apart. All right. The word assembly here is the Greek word synagoguin. Synagoguin. We get the word synagogue from this. There's a lot of discussion about this word. Basically, a synagogue is a place of learning. Traditionally, we use this word to talk about a Jewish place of learning, but it doesn't have to mean that. And so when James says someone's going to come into your assembly, he could be talking about their church, even though they're members of the Church of Jerusalem, right? So either they found or formed local churches where they are, or he's talking about a hypothetical church for when he's like, hey, if somebody comes into church, he's talking about church in general, or he's talking about just a general meeting place. So there's a lot of discussion about it. Most commentators land on a church where they are. I'm not sold on that idea, but it could be that they found churches where they are. But the idea is that if they have found churches where they're scattered, then clearly they seem to be churches that prioritize wealth and not preach the full gospel of Jesus, right? And we know there's no such thing as those churches today, right? Right. All right, so here's my paraphrase of the text. James says, you can't have real faith at the same time you're showing favoritism to wealthy people and their riches. Think about it. If someone comes into your assembly wearing a Rolex and Armani clothes, and after him walks in a poor person in rags, and then you give preference to the rich person by saying, sit in the VIP section, while telling the poor person, find a spot on the ground, aren't you discriminating with corrupt motives? Listen up, my beloved church. Didn't God choose the world poor but faith rich ones to be on top in this upside down kingdom that he promised to those who love him? But you've savagely disesteemed the poor. You've become just like the very same rich and high and mighty people that oppress and exploit you when they drag you to court and mock the name of God. Look, you do well when you fulfill the royal rule, love your neighbor as yourself, but when you play favorites, you're sinning and you're guilty of breaking God's law. You're lawbreakers. Time out. To Christians, again, today in our modern Christian parlance, we say, I'm a sinner saved by grace. That wasn't at play in the early church. They're not sinners. They're saints. They're Christians. They wouldn't probably use the moniker Christians of themselves maybe this early, but they would say, I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm not a sinner. I'm a Christian. Because they didn't think about it in states of being as much as the trajectory of your life. And so James was calling them out saying, guys, you're lawbreakers. And they would have said, no, I'm not. I'm not a murderer and adulterer. This is just a little thing. Now James is going to bring the hammer down. So let's let James continue. He says, when you play favorites, you're sinning and you're guilty of breaking God's law. You're lawbreakers. You can keep the whole law, but if you fall short in just one point, you're guilty of breaking the whole law. The same God who told us not to murder also told us not to commit adultery. So you could be innocent of committing adultery, but then murder someone, and you're still breaking the law. You're a lawbreaker. I hate to break up the paraphrase one more time, but I want to clarify. A lot of times people use this to say that all sins are equal in the eyes of God. That's certainly not the case. It is not. If I hit my thumb with a hammer and exclaim a vulgarity, I'm not prone to do that. But let's say I did. You would say, that's just as bad as pushing a child into traffic. No, it's not. That's vile. You know what I'm saying? God sees all, sin in one point, guilty of all. That's not the point James is trying to make. James is trying to say you are in right standing before God, but you could really mess up your walk with something little, just like something that you see as big, and you say, "Well, I'm not committing adultery. I'm not." No, the same God who gave the big rules also gave these other rules too. And if you want to be standing right before God, you follow all the rules, not just the ones you care to keep or the ones that are easy to keep. You see, sure.
Why do you think it is that it's so easy for us to discern when something's being done against us, but it's so hard for us to see when we're doing something against somebody else?
Yeah, that's actually a really profound question. Right. I was just about to say, on the surface, there's a very simple and pat answer and say, well, that's just the flesh. That's just, that's how we are, how we're wired. But on a deeper level, there's a whole world to be explored. Not one that's fun to explore, but it is deeply, deeply self-worshiping. It is deeply self-exalting to say, oh man, I see all these sins in everybody else, but I'm not seeing them in me. And it's deeply self-exalting, which we know that was the oracles against Tyre and Sidon in Ezekiel that many have applied to Satan. The very first thing was, I will ascend, I will be like the Most High. Self-exaltation. Pride. That's all it is. And the scriptures say pride is the mother of all contention. Kim?
Reminds me, Jesus said, if you look on a woman in face,
Yes. Yes.
you're an adulterer.
That's exactly right. I almost went there a second ago when we were talking about this idea of breaking the law. Is Jesus touched on this? When people say, well, I'm not doing this, that, and the other. And Jesus is like, no. The spirit is the important part. So let me,
again.
exactly right. Just like Philippians 4, 8, and 9. Exactly. So let me finish with the very short paragraph and the paraphrase. Very short paraphrase paragraph, VSPP. If you record it on a VCR, then you have a VCR of VSPP. All right. Or a DVD. All right. So here's how James finishes. He says, so talk and act like you're subject to judgment by the standards of this royal rule of freedom. The person who doesn't show mercy won't find mercy, but God's mercy will prevail over judgment for those who show mercy to others. I don't have this in my notes. I almost said script because I'm used to saying that in the podcast. I don't have this in my notes. I was talking to my mom today. I posted in the podcast to the podcast page and my personal page on Facebook. I said Sunday 6/30/24. I'll be addressing the apology accepted, access denied meme that's been floating around. I'm not crazy about the meme. In fact, I'll just come right out and say I can't stand the meme. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be boundaries around relationships, especially where there's continued threat, danger, aggression. We need to draw boundaries. We need to be careful. But the pat, truncated, picket sign, bumper sticker, Walmart t-shirt saying, apology accepted, access denied. Okay. It just screams like sassy 9-year-old who just broke up with her mini boyfriend. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's so juvenile and so petty. And it does not drink from the deep and pristine wells of Christ's forgiveness. You know what I'm saying?
I don't get it.
Apology accepted, access denied. And so their point, as I understand it, as it has been defended on Facebook, is that you can forgive people, but you don't always have to let them back into your life. If that is, I said this to my mom today. I'm getting back to the conversation with my mom. I said, I'm not saying there's a time and a place for those particular settings in which we have to draw boundaries, but that's kind of become our default. I said, I just want the pendulum to swing a little bit more back toward the idea that when you forgive someone, there's full and real reconciliation. You say, that's dangerous. I could get hurt again. Yep. Yeah. Yes. Yes. That's why Jesus said, 70 times and 7 you forgive, and they sin against you. And so the idea is such an absurd hyperbole that Jesus is saying, I want you to beat them many times because he forgives us that many times. Can you imagine if God said, apology accepted, access denied, kiddo? Come on.
We'd all be in trouble.
Yeah.
We would.
Now, again, are there times for boundaries? Yes, we're going to cover that in the podcast when I cover my bases and get everything. But in reality, the kind of forgiveness that we should be searching for and embracing at all costs whenever possible, is the kind that says, no matter what, I will forgive and I will receive you into my life. Well, that person's going to hurt you again. Yes. I've had people come to this church that other people have called me and warned me about and said, they're going to hurt you. Yes, okay. I don't know if they will or not. I'm going to love them and I'm going to have them in our church. And yeah, it seems pretty much true that when people warn me about people, they usually take off and they leave a lot of hurt in their wake. That's what love does, guys. Love loves. It doesn't, you know, I don't know. I think our marker is a little bit too thick at the tip where we draw our boundaries with. You know what I mean, Kim?
Nancy has been a wonderful example of that because of a family member who has wronged her big time. And she's let it go. And kept in contact, and this family member still calls like, nothing, you know.
Yep.
But she's an inspiration for me.
Amen. I feel like I'm good at this because there I go again. I think I'm pretty good at everything. But if I really examine my life,
Amber raises her eyebrows.
right? If I really examine my life, I don't know if I am. Susan and Pearl. Okay, let's switch it up. Pearl and Susan.
Okay.
Pearl. Oh my goodness.
I had a client who I want to expand on your concept. There are some situations where denial is an appropriate response.
I agree.
Because I have clients that I've encouraged to move in the direction of very limited contact.
Yep.
After molestation as a child.
Absolutely. Yeah, such horrific encounters such as sexual abuse and things like that. There's a lot of things at play there. However, I would be remiss not to say that I've seen the grace and forgiveness and mercy of God work powerfully even in those circumstances. So like you say, to your point, Susan, there are times when we say this is for protection, healthy boundaries for everybody. That's very important. But we should always handle things like that, and as to which Susan would agree, I'm 100% sure, on a case-by-case basis. We don't just say, oh, that was that crime, that's a class D, letter F, letter O, 12.79 scriptural felony. That's an access denial. No, come on, guys. We just do it in the grace of God. So the reason I thought of all that is you look at the scripture, it says, the person who doesn't show mercy won't find mercy when they're judged by God according to this royal rule. There's a book by Skye Jethani called What If Jesus Actually Meant What He Said? And one of those things Jesus said was, if you don't forgive others, my Father won't forgive you. And that's the verse I mentioned to my mom in this discussion. She wasn't against me. She just wanted my thoughts on it because she had very similar concerns of, there's people that, and she mentioned somebody she knows. It was a bad marriage breakup. And I said, yes, it's ugly. It's terrible. The things that happened were awful. And again, it is our nature to kind of come up and say, I know an exception to that. We all do, right? I think the rule of thumb should be seek reconciliation at all costs when possible. So I was talking to my mom, and I mentioned that verse, and I said, I'm glad God forgives us. And the extent to which Jesus does forgive us is the extent to which we forgive each other. That's the rule. That's the rule. And the extent to which you forgive yourself is the extent you should forgive others. Everybody talks about forgiving yourself today, and I think there's some merit there. I think it's given a little bit too much clout, but I do think there's some merit. I'm very good at forgiving myself. I'm a very forgiving person when it comes to Michael Britt offending me. I don't stay mad at myself for too long. In fact, I think I'm a pretty great guy. Tell you what, I'm at peace with myself. We haven't fought in so long. But in all sincerity, right? Now, here's what James says. The person who doesn't show mercy won't find mercy. Love your neighbor as yourself. So, with our neighbor, who is my neighbor? Jesus answered that question, right? Everybody, even the Samaritan, right? What we don't like. Yeah. Love your neighbor as yourself. show mercy to others the same way you'd want mercy shown to you. And that's the part that I don't think I'm good at. In fact, that's the part I know I'm not good at. There's some real opportunities, because there have been people who've hurt me that I have said that I forgave. And when it comes to the people who owed me money, I literally forgave their debt. And I'm like, I forgave them. Chalk one up for the Britsky. Britsky, baby, for the win. But then my heart, they still owe me all that money. They do. And then I'll write it off again in my mind by excoriating their character. Well, they're lewd fellows of the baser sort. They're just, losers. They would never, I was a fool to lend them money. I was a fool to take them at their word. Of course I have to write it off and be the bigger man. That's not forgiveness, that's condescension. That's exactly what James is describing in here. Looking down on people, I suppose I'll dare to forgive them. Instead of saying, I've been forgiven of a lot. Like, that's my problem, guys. And again, James has torn me up. And I hope it tears you up, but I don't want to be alone in this fight, okay? But as I'm looking into this perfect law of liberty and looking into the mirror, I see some real opportunities for some, I almost said zip popping, that's gross. But I'm just saying, when you're at high school and you look in the mirror, you're on patrol. You're on patrol. It's before you get on the school bus, there's girls to impress. And you don't want a whole lot. So I'm looking into the mirror, and it's not girls I have to impress. I only impress one girl, amen? And I still do a lot of stupid tricks to try to do it, and she doesn't. She's not impressed. Look what I can do, and I hurt myself. Anyway, but I'm looking into the law of liberty, and I'm seeing a lot of blemishes as I'm going through James. And honestly, I just want to encourage my church family not to run from that. Let it sit with you for a while. It's not something you're going to be able to fix overnight. That's the thing about looking in mirrors. We go, okay, in my case, that needs a lot of work. Some of this extra stuff around my jowls, the inflammation, some of the extra couple of water weight pounds, I can't get rid of it right away, but I know it gives me something to work on so I can change my lifestyle. You know what I'm saying? And so anyways, that's the paraphrase. I just have one observation, and then there's actually questions. I've never done this before. I don't know if I'll ever do it again, but there's a website called Precept Austin. I recommend it greatly. Precept Austin. Precept Austin, I think it's .org.com. It has a compilation of every every public domain commentary on the market. And some, if they're small enough quotes, it's legal to put commentary from, paid commentaries on there. And so if you say James chapter 2, just Google Precept Austin James 2. And it'll get there. The first link you see will be that. Click there, and it is just overwhelming amount of resources. And that's not the only place I study for these lessons in James, but it usually gives me enough of a springboard and a rabbit trail that I can go way down the rabbit trail. Well, on this website, Precept Austin, it actually included questions from the Life Application Study Bible. And so I copied them and pasted them because they were so good. I said, I'm not even going to try to rephrase these and I'll avoid catch the spirit of them. And I'm just going to copy and paste them and give credit to the source. These questions that we're going to cover in a second are from the Life Application Study Bible. So I want to make a couple remarks, and then could we start a little bit later? I want to be conscious of the time, but I want to make just one remark, and then we'll go to these questions and make that our open forum section. So very briefly, here's just my sole remark. It should now come into full view what is on James's mind as a pastor watching his flock from afar. It is clear at this point that James's church has fallen prey to materialism and all that it entails. What was only hinted at in chapter 1 is now on overt display as James rebukes his church family in verse 6. He says, "You despise the poor," in verse 6. He called them right out. It should come as no surprise that the church and the lifestyle of generosity that flowed freely within it was a safe haven from the clutches of materialism and how it ravages the minds of those into whom it sinks its claws. The church kept them safe from the woeful influences of the materialistically obsessed world. So I wrote, don't lose the plot here. James is still very much on the topic of faith without works and action being vain and dead. He's just under the surface of it, applying it in this particular instance that is relevant to his scattered congregation. So I invite you to consider how this might apply to your own life. He just got done talking about how there's people barking around saying, I got faith, I got faith, I got faith. And then he said, just in chapter 2, you ever think you're at the bottom of a stair, but you've got one left? And there's that stomach feeling, you're like, ah, ah! And it's like 4 inches, but that's not important right now.
I think there's one.
Yeah, yes, yes. It's somehow worse. You know? That is kind of like how chapter 2 starts. James is like, hey, faith without works is dead. He's bringing the heat. And then chapter 2, he's like, hey, y'all are really messing up. And the church is like, what? Hold on. You know what I mean? Like, if you read it, the tone doesn't shift as much as it intensifies. And he says, here's what I'm talking about. So James 1, he sets it all up. And then James 2, he goes, here's what I'm talking about, guys. I'm talking about you. I'm talking about you. And then he says, you've despised the poor. So he kind of hints at these things in his first chapter, talking about the word seed planted in you. You need to look in the mirror. You need to, all this really cool stuff. And then he goes, this is why I'm trying to teach this. So like if James 1 was the sermon, chapter 2 is the painful application, right? They're a living application. And so he says, you guys are involved in assemblies of some kind that when VIPs walk in, they're being given the royal treatment. But they're the royal rule that contradicts your royal treatment. And it is love your neighbor as yourself. And again, James has drunk deeply of Matthew and Proverbs. I say Matthew because that's where Jesus is teaching the religion. Matthew and Proverbs, Matthew and Proverbs, Matthew and Proverbs. Jesus covers who is my neighbor, who is my neighbor. James says, love your neighbor as yourself. He's assuming that these Christians know the words of Jesus. And if he pastored them, they sure do. And so he's saying, love your neighbor as yourself. They would not even be able to respond, who is my neighbor? They would have known. You see, and so James he is building on what they know and rebuking them, saying, look at what he says. I want to read it from the King James. Look how he says this. Right. Do not rich men oppress you and draw you before the judgment seat? Do not they blaspheme that worthy name by the which ye are called? So he's saying you have put yourself in the same place as the people who are dragging you to court to exploit you and to oppress you and to rob you. You're putting yourself in the same position as the people who blaspheme the name of Christ. You're doing that with your actions. So what he's doing is he's painting them with a pretty ugly brush. And he's trying to help them see you've got a big talk. But when it comes to this area of your walk, it's non-existent. And if you don't start showing mercy, you're not going to receive mercy from the master. Like, that's a real warning. It's a real warning. So let's open up the questions. How closely does our congregation reflect the socioeconomic and racial neighborhood in which we gather? I'm going to clarify. We live in Thompson. I would say newlywed to nearly dead, so that's Florida, okay? But Thompson is. We look around and we say, okay, my financial status, I don't quite belong in Thompson. I can't quite afford to live here. We have a parsonage that's very affordable, but if I were to try to buy a house next door, I can't afford a house next door. Are you kidding me? You know what I mean? I mean, pretty much nobody can afford a house anywhere anymore, but you know, you get what I mean. So like, I am of the class that dwells in houses that are mobile. I grew up in a trailer, guy. That's how I roll, man. That's how it is. Like, and when I look around at Thompson, I'll give you a great example. Mondays and Fridays, I play pickleball at the YMCA. Tuesdays, I play pickleball at Pegasus on the base. Totally different atmospheres between the Pegasus and the YMCA. YMCA, man, it's the why. You come as you are. Nobody asks why. See what I did there? Anyways, but you go to Pegasus, like I step in and I'm like, ooh, I'm poor. Like, it just happened. I stepped on the court and he was like, let me just take off my Rolex. You know, I'm sure it's not quite that way, but that's the impression I got. Because everybody's just so together, and they're just like, yeah, and they're fixing their monocles as they're playing. You know, it's very like well-to-do. It's very cool. They have it together, right? And they know how to play really well. My point is, it's two different classes of people doing the same thing. Not classes in terms of one being better than the other, but each has developed its own micro culture. You know what I'm saying? The Y seemed to me to be extremely down to earth. Pegasus, I'm sure, is. I'm just brand new to it. And so right now, my first impression is, please, sir, will you shake my hand? Will you get to know me? Am I worthy? It's very like, I feel very like, you know, it's just different. But I really like it, but it's different. So when I look around at our town, there is a sense in which I kind of feel a little out of place because I'm like, oh, I see you live in Thompson. I see that you have been a part of this multi-generational dynasty and that you have 7 figures in the bank. I have sometimes 4. Hello. You know what I mean? Like, it's different. And so our church should be reflecting the socioeconomic culture around us, but also there is a very real sense in which the scripture is very clear. People who are very rich often do not see the need for Christ. And so it's not surprising to me that we don't have a lot of affluent and wealthy people filling churches anywhere. So I don't know, just a thought on that. Any thoughts, Nancy?
Well, kind of in the same thing. When I was still working, and I would do home visits, what humbled me was I could go to a house, and I covered anywhere from Freeport to Fitchburg, where I wouldn't even dare sit down because, or you know, should I take my shoes off?
Right.
Or
Right.
I don't want to leave any marks or anything. And then 5 minutes down the road, I would go to a home where you could see through the roof, and you didn't want to sit down. But what I found most of the time was those folks were just as happy in their life, in their surroundings, as those were in the other houses.
Quite so.
Yep. Well, you know, and I thought a lot of times too, probably more happy. They didn't.
Yep.
Yeah. And I just found that very humbling in that job, you know, because I never knew what I was going to come up against. And it was interesting to see the vast differences in just within 5 or 10 miles.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that observation. I think it's important. I think it does kind of go with the flow of what James was talking about, money and status and things like that. Cheryl?
I think most of these questions, I don't think this church has to worry about.
I agree.
It's like you're looking for an argument. Let's face it, the church we went to in Norfolk, we were the first interracial couple to come there and have kids, and so we integrated this white church that had tons of money, fought about money all the time, and I was thinking, you know, Rich go down there and do a sermon, except oops, the church isn't there anymore. And that's, I knew that would happen because they just fought all the time. They were so nasty, the minister. I remember sitting there, because I was on the diaconate, and I remember sitting there during the meetings that we had every other month, and some of these people were so nasty to them. And this one guy brought $10,000, which I guess in the 80s it was a big deal. But anyway, he brought $10,000 in bills, and he put it in front of the minister, and he says, "I'll give this to you, Jack, if you leave." And it's like, whoa, you know, and it's just, they were so nasty. And then they I don't know. So I don't think that this church has to worry about it. I think that this church is very quietly integrated, you know, and because let's face it, I've been to churches where kids thought it was great that the little interracial family got to go on Christmas Eve up in front of everybody with the kids and everything. And they got to light the candles, and the kids thought that was a thing we were supposed to do every Christmas Eve. Right. Because, you know, the people come to visit, and they're like, oh, it's an interracial church, they embrace people here. So, and I just did it because the kids liked it, so I knew it would be used. But, I don't think most of these questions are a problem with this church. I think that it's not I think this, and actually, Arnold, the first time we went, we're like, yay, we're not the only interracial couple. Sure. You know, Pearl and Ray came and broke everybody down and everything, and then Adam and Eileen, you know. So we didn't have to be like the little snowplow, you know. We just ride in on everybody's tracks. You're the snowplow.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you for being the snowplow.
Thank you. Thank you indeed.
We were the snowplow a lot, so yeah.
So, I love how you said that, because as I'm putting these questions down and I read them, I said, I don't think these are problems for our church, because I really like how it said, how closely does our congregation reflect the socioeconomic and racial neighborhood in which we gather? I think quite well. I think quite well.
Yeah.
Here's what's particularly interesting to me. Everybody's like, why don't you have more young people in your church? Okay. Have you seen Topsom?
Yeah.
Have you seen? I mean,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, we're more likely to start a church to minister to the Highlands rather than the skateboard park. You know what I'm saying? Like that.
Yeah.
That's how it is. And people say, "Oh man, you're just a church on the way out." If this is a church on the way out because of our demographics, then Topsom's a town on the way out because of our demographics.
Yep.
The church ought to accurately reflect the demographic. Small town, small church. Older town, older church. That's how it goes. Like, this is not a scary thing for me. It would be a little scary if we were anomalous and we had nothing but 20-somethings running around. I'm thinking, where's the wisdom? Where's the age? Where's the mentors? You know what I'm saying? Like, that would be much scarier to me. Yes, but you have the youth. Dude, I've been a youth. I am okay with not being completely inundated. Right? And that's the thing, yeah, right? Now, I'm not saying I don't want young families and young couples. I would love young families and young couples. Round out the demographics. But again, until Topsom and our surrounding neighborhoods and things like that round out, then the church, I don't expect will round out any more than that. And to wit, there are a number of churches that have very young families and young community, and I can't think of one that doesn't have an overflowing amount of drama and controversy and goofiness, because everybody's just so emotional, high-strung, and hormonal about everything. Not being rude, I'm just being honest. Like, this is like Topsom Baptist Church is my favorite church in the entire universe, not just because I'm the pastor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Like, anyways. Mm-hmm. Oh, girl. Does Susan have a question? Is that why you're raising your hand? I'm just messing with you. No, go ahead. Don't do that. Don't say that.
But I read today that Maine is the poorest out of all the New England states.
Yep.
And I was like, but then I read another story that had to do with Camden.
Mm-hmm.
I'm done.
I thought you were going to tell us what the other story was.
Yeah.
Okay. I got you. So, no, Susan.
I recognize in the realm of discrimination
Mm-hmm.
that I have a preference to someone who's gay over someone who's
Oh.
when it comes to interacting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I found that to be true in my mind in terms of, like, there was a guy I used to work with at a place. I'm not even going to say where, because I don't want anybody. It was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. It was in Augusta. So, but honestly, greatest guy in the world. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience. I hope it's not true of me. Please don't let it be true of me, Lord. This is my greatest fear. Nobody else could smell it. Only me. And I hung around this guy, bigger guy, not like morbidly obese, bigger guy. And whenever I hung out with him and talked with him, he's the friendliest, happiest guy in the world. But I couldn't be around him for more than a few minutes before my stomach would genuinely begin to turn.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually okay with wearing masks for COVID when that happened again in Topsom. I was like, oh, this is so good. I would much rather smell the contents of my mustache. And again, it's not being mean. It's just like, oh, I don't want to feel sick, right? That's just, so I don't want to have to like do like checks at the door, like we.
But did you ever say anything?
I didn't, and to this day I still don't know if I would even know how to begin to address that with somebody. I really struggle with that.
It's just like if someone has something in their nose.
Oh, I'll tell them.
Well, just tell him.
Teeth or something.
Yeah.
There's some drama going on.
Yeah. But nobody else could smell it. And to my shame, I did check with another buddy of mine who was there. I'm like, hey, is is it me? He's like, yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. I had a friend
It
that was
wasn't my
very,
mustache. It was definitely this kid. Like, I don't know.
I had a friend that was very overweight, and riding
Yeah.
in the car with her in the wintertime, you know, and I'd always pretend I was hot. And I would
Roll
roll
down the window.
because I'm a gaggy person,
Yep.
and I would start feeling like I was going to
Yep.
gag.
Yep.
No, what you need to do is you just need to have that Arnold call that guy, because what I do, because I worry about, because I'm so overweight, I worry about smelling, and sometimes I'll say to Arnold, "Do I smell?" And he has to sniff me.
Yeah.
So but I
Yeah.
mean, I worry about
That's
that.
something married couples can do. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
Yeah. So just
Yeah.
call, just have Arnold do it.
Yeah. Amber, where are we at? She goes, nope. No, I'll trust the right guard, she said. Yeah.
What I'm referring to is a client that when I worked as a physical therapy aide,
Mm-hmm.
a client came in and it was so overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
It was so different than
Yeah.
normal people.
Yeah. And for me, I have to, and honestly, because when I was preparing this, I thought, how far are we going to go into the discussion? Are we going to go into like how people look, or how people talk, or how people smell? Because those can actually be really deep-seated prejudices. Even in some places, your accent can be a reason why people don't like you. Talking on the phone to customer service. Hello, this is Rob. My first thought is, dude, your name ain't Rob. Tell me the truth, right? And it might not be, but they're saying what they say because they're so used to being hated because of their accent. They have to try to come up with an American name to try to assuage some of your ire. You know what I'm saying? So, like, there's, you know.
Well, I
What's
know
that?
if I come out of the bathroom and my dress is tucked into my pantyhose, these girls in this church
Correct,
got my back.
correct.
I know they do.
Cheryl.
Thank you. Yeah,
I-
It was our anniversary, and we were at a seafood place. Oh, this place is so
Uh-huh.
good. So anyway, I went into the bathroom, I came out, and I had
Toilet paper stuck to the shoe.
I
Oh!
cracked up when I saw it, and the guy in the couple next door,
Yep.
across from me,
Yep.
he started cracking up. I said, "Why not?"
Why not? You know, let's sum up this. Let's put a snow globe on the top of this one like this. Let's round it out. By saying that there are different kinds of people who will respond differently, and the level of your friendship will determine if you can tell somebody they got something sticking out of their nostril or not. If it's a stranger, I might give a polite to form a subconscious desire on their end to get that fat out
Yeah,
of the cave.
basically like
You know what I mean?
Bring a little kid.
Right. So with a buddy of mine, I might be like, "Hey man, you got a bat in the cave," you know, and then they'll get it out, right?
Bring a
But-
little kid along.
Bring- Yeah. Right. So, but to use this as an illustration, if you're not going to say something, then don't look down on them for
Right.
having it, right? So to pull this into the real realm in which we live, we could look at somebody and we could say, "Ah, man, they're poor. They're always asking for stuff. They're always broke because they're always wasting their money." Have you noticed how never once James talks about how the reason why they're poor? He never says, "Well, they're poor because of this, that, and the other." And if they're poor because they wasted all their money, then he doesn't give any reasons. There's no qualifiers. In fact, it's kind of the assumption here that if they're poor, it's because of their state. It's because of someone died and things like that. There's not a lot of social securities.
They had fewer
Right.
resources.
Correct. These days, there are a lot more reasons. There are a lot more reasons not to be poor. There's a lot more ways to not be poor. It's true. I see guys standing in the street corner and I'm looking, I'm like, dude, you are a healthy 45, 50-year-old man. And so it's really challenging for me. But James doesn't say, analyze whether or not they should be poor and then treat them as such. He doesn't. He's talking about people who are the have-nots. It doesn't matter if they wasted all their inheritance and they have not. That's not up for you. What your job is to treat them just as well as you would treat somebody who's got a robust 401k and a Jaguar in the parking lot. You see what I'm saying? Like, and you know what? When I used to read this chapter, I used to think that James was trying to tease out an ulterior motive from the church. That they were saying, "Oh, I want the big givers in my church. I want the tithers in my church, so I'm going to treat them better." I don't think that's really the case. I think he's actually speaking to all of our deep-seated tendency to treat affluent people better. we may sit here and disagree, but I would encourage you to examine what star strikes you. You know, when you're starstruck, what makes you starstruck? Well, this celebrity, there's a kind of maybe modern day parallel to that. You know what I mean? If I'm talking to my wife and Denzel Washington comes in, and I go, hold on, babe, the Equalizer's here. The Pelican Brief is here. No, I don't. You know what I mean? I'm gonna go talk to him.
I knocked her out of the way.
That's just the way it is, you know. I love Denzel Washington. I would love to meet him, right? But in reality, that starstruckness, I think that's kind of what James is getting at. Is when they a ring of gold. What's really interesting is the Greek is actually Goldfinger. And one of the commentaries made a joke about Goldfinger, James Bond Goldfinger, the Greek is Goldfinger, and it indicates that it's not just a ring on a finger; his fingers are covered with gold. And Seneca actually he was a contemporary of Christ. He actually had a phrase about how we deck all our fingers with gold and things like that. So when he's talking about a Goldfinger, he's referring to a very specific person who is extremely wealthy, extremely rich. And they come into the assembly and everybody goes, "Oh, Mr. Abernathy, sir, won't you please sit here? You get on the ground, There's no chairs left. Get on the ground. Won't you please sit here?" Now, just throwing it out there for you. I'm just throwing it out there for you. There's a big deal when it comes to honor and respect. But if a guest missionary comes in and all the guys have already get out their seats and there's a bunch of ladies, and I'm not going to ask one of our ladies to get up so he can have a seat. You know what I mean? Like, this is my church. This is my flock. I'm not going to be a respecter of persons any more than just showing common courtesy to anybody. Much less just the guy who's really rich, and I say, "Oh, yes, are you quite wealthy? Let me, why don't you have a seat right here? I'll turn the camera toward you, and you can say a few words if you like." No, like James is saying, don't do that, because then you're actually becoming just like the people who have oppressed you, and you actually say that the rich are the bad guys because they're always taking you to task and taking advantage of you. And now you love them because you can get them on your side, and you're becoming just like them. You're allying with your enemy so that you can have some of their resources. You're allying with your enemy because you're so impressed by their gravitas and their wealth. James is saying this is garbage. This is not right. And you're doing it at the expense of showing mercy to the little people. Jesus came for the little people. Remember what he says? World poor, but faith rich. The upside down kingdom. That's what James is getting at. It's all in Jesus' words. I don't want to elongate the point. And I think we've already covered all of these. You can read them later in your own time, but the last question is the only one I really want to focus on. What can we do to be completely free from being impressed by the wealth or power of others? It's something I want you to consider. Cheryl?
I have a problem with people that have money or whatever, because I worked in a really expensive clothing store, had to cater to people. I was retail Cheryl, who was nice and tactful, and then I worked when I volunteered over at the gallery, and all these people come in, and I've had so many times when they know I'm not an elite person, and especially if I don't agree with their politics or whatever like that, don't say anything, but don't agree. And I kind of look down on them. I think that I tend to think of them as like superficial or whatever like that. I have a problem I have to work on with that. And if some wealthy person came, I would not be impressed. I guess I got my fill down in Norfolk.
I get it.
Even though my nieces think that girls are wealthy. So yeah, they thought they're like, oh, a rich lady. So apparently you're the rich lady.
Right,
So.
Goldfinger.
Where is it?
It's an interesting observation too, especially when you've had a lot of experience with the high and mighty and the ho-hums, that you're kind of like a bad taste in my mouth, right? And I think maybe that's kind of
The howls.
Yeah.
right. And I think that cautiously could be a halfway decent place to be in. We don't want to go to the other extreme and disesteem them because they're wealthy either, right? Maybe that in our age, in our postmodern age, could be a more likely tendency than the other extreme nowadays.
Well,
I don't know.
This is an unlikely person, but Donald Trump
Mhm.
had money and wealth, but he relates to working people. And I know when they made fun of him because he had all these bills hanging out of his pocket when he was getting on a plane.
Mhm.
Because he, as a president, he didn't carry money, but he always carried, bills for tips and stuff.
Hmm.
And I think that's why the left and the elites don't get why regular Americans like him, is because he maneuvered his way through all the wealthy people and everything like that for years and years and years, and he saw how they looked down on regular people,
Mhm.
and he does not. And
Mhm.
it's whether you like him or you hate him, he does not. And you can tell by the way he talks and the way he treats people.
Hmm.
And I know that my you guys didn't see me, didn't go to church. John, my niece's Tracy's boyfriend, he worked at Trump Hotel, and he said he helped set up for banquets and take down and everything. And times Trump would come through, and he'd say, "Do you guys have any? Can I get you some sodas and some sandwiches and things like that?" And he'd go out in the kitchen, and they'd still be working, and he'd ask them to bring stuff out there
Mhm.
to help the guys that were breaking down and
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
And he says he's not a racist. He's not a
Yeah.
But I think that he's an unlikely person for an example.
Sure.
But
Sure.
you
Yeah.
know,
Well, keeping in mind that, especially in this time and this setting in which James was writing, the rich and the poor were much more divided than they are now. Though we're well on the way back to that in America.
Yes.
But they were very much different caste. And if you were rich, you stepped on the little people to get rich. And then the little people would go, "Thank you for stepping on my head. Excuse me, my head. I'm so impressed by you." And James was like, "This is crazy. Don't do this." And then they'd come into church and be like, "Oh, please sit here." And James was like, "These are the people who wreck your life. What are you doing?" And so I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but to zoom out and then to wrap this up in James's fuller context, he just got done talking about how faith without works is dead. He's going to talk about that again in this chapter several times. He just got done talking about how looking in a mirror and not making changes is nothing. It does no good, right? So having the word seed in you and letting it wither by inaction, no good. And then he moves right to this thought, which is giving them a prime example of what it means to say you have faith and not execute that faith and let that faith show. That kind of faith receives no mercy from the hand of the judge, because faith will always result in mercy. As I was studying for this, I actually said out loud, "Lord, give me a genuine faith." Not that I don't think I have one, but I want it to be more genuine. I want to show more mercy. I want to have more love. I want to have more purity. I want to have more discipline. I want my faith to make me become like Jesus. And it's just like I preached on Sunday, I know it's not going to come from trying hard. It's going to come from abiding with Jesus, being with my rabbi, and watching him work so that I can start to work like him and eventually train others to work like him. And that's how the process has to work. And James has all this in mind when he's saying this to the church. And so today it's a very brief lesson, on not invalidating your faith claim by playing favorites, but rather being like Jesus and treating everyone the same, in as much as it might even look like you're treating the poor better than the rich because of how much you're going out of your way to treat the poor. And as I studied for this, it wrecked me because I started thinking about how, I have to do this for this person, I have to do this for this person, and I'm like, dude, it is my privilege. God has put me in a position so I can do things for people. I don't know, Susan.
I think it boils down to expecting yourself to treat each individual you interact with as valuing the person who is that person.
Yep.
That individual.
Yep. Seeing past whether they're poor or rich and just loving them. I'm going to